Okay, so I need to start out the podcast today with a little something that made me laugh to myself while by myself. I stopped by the old Radio Shack the other day. As a podcaster, I often have to do that. My world is ruled by adapters and thingies for audio editing. And so I went over to Radio Shack, big friend of the show and huge sponsor of The Broken Brain, I hope, in the near future, after they hear this. So I pick up an adapter. It's one of these little things that you take to make the little metal thingy go into the hole that's intended for the big metal thingy, stereo adapter. It's the thing that you plug your headphones into. If you have a headphone that has that little thin metal thing at the end, but you need it to have the big, hefty metal thing for the mixing board that you might use for your podcast. Anyway, I had to pick up a couple of those. And I just happened to notice on this. So it's a package with this little adapter. It's all that's in it, this thing. It gives the description, 6.3 millimeter stereo male to 3.5 mono female. And anyway, as I'm opening it up, I notice on the inside, it tells me this product is ideal for connecting a 3.5 millimeter mono cable to a 6.3 millimeter stereo jack. So literally, the product description is what it is ideal for. Anyway, welcome to The Broken Brain. This is your weekly dose of mental health. This is Dwight Hurst with you as always to be your psychotherapist for the next hour-ish or so, or however long this episode is. Our topic today is going to be divorce, something that is near and dear. I don't know if it's dear, but it's near to a lot of people. It affects families. Pretty much every family that I know of has been impacted by it, either directly or indirectly, or by extension to other members of their family. Chances are you know somebody who's been divorced, or you've been divorced, or you're going to be divorced, or you have been divorced. Boy, that was ominous, isn't it? I didn't mean it to say like that, but divorce touches all of our lives. It's just a thing that happens, and yet we have a lot of hesitancy in about discussing it, and specifically talking about how healthy and or happy divorcing, and trying to make a divorce as healthy, as effective as possible. And I think all of us could reach into the murky depths of our memory, and we could pull out examples that were super duper high conflict, unhealthy examples of divorce. We could also reach in there and find the amazing examples of people who work really hard to overcome bad situations, put their kids first, and are very impressive. That we've experienced both of those, and most likely seen a lot of things in between those two, if that's the extremes on the spectrum. So I wanted to have an episode where we talk about this. This is not an episode about avoiding divorce. This is actually an episode about what to do if you should find yourself in that situation, and what feedback do people working in this field have for the situation. Joining us today from California is going to be Arianna Jeret. You may recognize that name from such podcasts as, well, this one. I reviewed one of her articles that she wrote for YourTango.com a while back about revenge porn. She's a great writer, very talented. She's also a divorce coach and mediator. And after we connected over that article, I invited her to come on board and be a part of this discussion because she's got a lot of wisdom in that area. Also joining us is Dr. Paul Peluso. Dr. Peluso is what is he anyway? Here he is. He's the chair. I wanted to get the position right. He's a chair and an associate professor for Florida Atlantic University, the College of Education. He's a counselor educator, but also in private practice, and he's also the president of the International Association of Marriage and Family Counselors. That's IAMFC, or IAMF. If you're making it into a word, which is kind of a stupid thing to do, don't do that. Anyway, he was willing to join us today as well. He's got a lot of experience writing, teaching, and counseling in these kinds of situations as well. So we're really, really grateful to both of them for coming on today. Also joining me is my colleague, Dori Pye. Dori is a mental health counselor who is part of the group practice that I'm associated with here at the Aspire Network. It's called, is the name of it. She actually rents the office that I used to rent. So I think you'll be able to hear that in her voice, that we have that in common, that we both have shared that office. So there, I just shared that with you for no good reason. She's got a lot of other good qualities as well, even more than that. She's a specialist in the area of relationships, works a lot with teenagers, and works with eating disorders and other things like that. And joining me as always, you know him, you love him, you know that you love him, Mike Fitch, my constant companion. Not really constant, but he's here a lot, and he's able to be here today, so there's that too. We're glad, always I'm just glad when anybody ever shows up, so that it's not just me ranting into a device, watching little vocal lines go up and down in an empty room, like I'm doing right now, actually. But you're there for me, aren't you? I know you are. Thanks. Anyway, without further ado, we will get into our wonderful conversation about this fun and enlightening topic. It's going to be a good time. I'll come back at the end to let you know how you can learn a little bit more about those members of our panel and, some other stuff. So, enjoy. Talking about divorce. Plugged in, it actually changed. You know what? It actually changed us all to mono.
Okay.
Could you use that one?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. But, I don't want to just enable you to ruin the entire podcast, Mike.
Oh, sure.
Just out of politeness. Again. Okay. I'm actually recording Mike, too, so that I don't ruin the podcast. Gotcha. Mike and I spent 25 minutes once doing a podcast before we realized that I hadn't actually started the recorder. So I always like to make sure that it's recording.
It was the best one ever.
Yeah, it was. It was the best ever, and it was just for us, though. Okay, good.
Howdy.
Welcome, everybody. Hey, I'm really grateful to everybody for being here. It looks like we are good for the sound. If I'm going to go ahead and... I thought we could go ahead and do a sound check while we do introductions, because not everybody knows each other. So I'll go first. My name's Dwight Hurst. You guys should all know who I am, because I'm the one who put it all together, and I work with you too. So if you pretend you don't know me, it'll be all that more offensive. Welcome. I am glad to have you guys here talking about what I think is a really important topic that doesn't get enough attention in the world. There you go. So there we go. Let's go around for our room first, and then we'll branch out to other states.
My name is Dori Pye. I'm a clinical mental health counselor. That's my licensure. I was really excited to do this because I've seen it from a lot of different angles. I've been divorced, and I have dealt with many couples who are contemplating divorce, some who have been divorced. So I agree with Dwight. I think it's a subject that doesn't get enough attention. I think the assumption is that because 49, I don't know what the current percentage is, if it's 49 or 52, it seems to be in the last 20 years vacillating between those two percentages.
Yeah, I think it's less than 50.
Yeah, so. I think it is too now. But I think people have a common misconception that because half of the country does it, it's no big deal. And there's definitely, I think divorce is definitely a traumatic experience for all parties involved. So I'm happy to be here and do this as well.
All right, I guess that's my cue. My name is Mike Fitch. I'm also a clinical mental health counselor. Been working with Dwight for quite some time now, but before this, I kind of have an interesting perspective because I did work for the Division of Child and Family Services before this in Child Protective Services, so I saw some of the worst case scenarios when it came to divorce.
Did you say caused or saw?
Yes, caused.
Oh.
I caused some of the worst case scenarios. But a lot of those situations where the parents are blaming each other rather than giving each other the benefit of the doubt, calling, basically accusing each other of child abuse.
40 minutes. Distance 8.3.
I'm not sure what, is that me?
Miles. Average pace 4 minutes.
Is that you, Mike? Is that a
He's-
time bomb that you
Apparently
smuggled
so.
into the room or
That's
something?
Mike running a race. That,
Apparently so.
Mike is fooling an app on his phone into thinking that he is running right now.
And I'm
apparently.
doing pretty well because I'm doing 4-minute miles. So
While sitting down in
that's
place.
awesome.
Really?
I've never run that fast before.
All right, so let's wing our way to. You guys want to arm wrestle for it? Let's see, that's a Skype joke. Arianna, why don't you go first from California?
All right, so I'm
think
Arianna
that's what it
Jeret, and I am a divorce coach and mediator, and I'm a MSW. I went through my own very, very, very high conflict divorce. I've met many people from CPS, so thanks for the good work you did. And, I don't know, it'll be interesting. I have a really different view from Dori, because I think that the trauma really occurs in the marriage. And I see divorce as a way of being able to finally recover from that.
I think that can happen too. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, and thanks again for being here digitally. Paul, you're the last one, last man standing or sitting.
Hi, well, I'm Paul Peluso, and I live in Palm Beach County, Florida. I'm actually the chair of the Counselor Education Department at Florida Atlantic University, but I'm also a licensed mental health counselor and a licensed marriage and family therapist. I have been in and out of practice for almost 20 years and have written on couples counseling and infidelity and a number of other topics as well. And I'm really anxious and interested to be involved in the podcast.
And you've offered to reference everything we say, right? Just to do citations for us?
Right,
You'll
yeah,
email
I'll
a
keep it all
page
in
out
APA style.
to all the listeners out there. That'll be good. I think that'll be real good. Well, very, very grateful and honored for all of you for being here, even Mike, who's here almost every episode. So,
Thank you, Dwight.
yeah, this is great. Well, I'd like to start the ball rolling, if you will. I know I emailed out a lot of different things to think about, and I'm sure we have lots of thoughts. So I want to start out by hitting this idea that I have found is more radical than I thought it was when I first thought of it, which is this. I often will talk to people when they talk to me about their marriage or talk to me about, marriage counseling, family counseling, those types of things. First of all, I always look at it as it's not really the therapist's job to save your marriage, because that's not always the most healthy outcome, for one thing. And I never really felt like that was a radical position, but some people act like it is. And so here's this other thing that I've come up with over the years. I think that if you look at the goal of a relationship and you look at a married couple, obviously the most ideal situation is to be happy and healthy in the relationship. But if you look at it's on the hierarchy of what is healthy and what is ideal, I look at it like the thing that is the most healthy and most ideal after that is actually a happy or healthy divorce situation. I think that's much better and much healthier than the unhealthy or unhappy marriage. And so I found that that's like surprisingly radical. People take that as some kind of radical position when I say that a lot of times, more than I thought it was when I came up with it. So I'm just going to throw that out and see your guys' reaction to that. What do you think?
well, I think people view happy divorce or healthy divorce as mutually exclusive. You know, there's not, I'm not saying I advocate that position at all. I'm just saying that's what I've run into as well, is that people
Like, can I
tend
have
to believe
a happy, healthy divorce? And
Yeah,
people are surprised
or-
with that concept.
right, or there's
Yeah.
no way to have a healthy, happy divorce. It's just something you've got to grit your teeth and get through. And
Or avoid at all costs.
yeah, live in, unhappiness. But I think that's probably the basis for a lot of that disbelief, is how do you have a happy, healthy, or maybe not even happy, but how do you have a healthy divorce which produces or which can help to have healthy children come out of that kind of experience.
I tell people when they start in couples counseling that, hey, look, I'm here to try to help you be healthy. If you guys stay together, I want you to be healthy together. If you break up, I want you to try to break up in as healthy a way as possible. And like I said, that does surprise people sometimes, but I think that's very important.
I think another thing to consider is that it's also not all one or not all the other. So it's not either happy, healthy divorce, right at the moment that we decide we're not going to be married together, and that's all that it is, or it's going to be this awful, shouting, horrible match, and that's all that it's going to be. I've probably encountered very few of the ones that start off happy and healthy all the way at the beginning. And I've seen more of the unhappy, kind of screaming at each other, but then having it evolve and emerge. And I think that's where we can play an important role in helping couples who are divorcing to be able to have a framework and be able to move from the hurt and the trauma, as some of the other folks were saying, into a healthier and happier situation, whether that's just through acceptance or through some genuine healing and growth. I think we can help move people along that way.
Do you find that a lot of times people approach that differently, that there is maybe one person who's looking at this will be healthier for me to be divorced. The other is like, no, I can't let it happen at all costs.
Oh, yeah, you definitely see that.
Absolutely. And I would just say that I don't think that healthy and happy are not synonymous. So you can have a healthy marriage and you're not going to be happy all the time, right? So happiness is an unrealistic expectation that we tend to have in this country, that it can be a constant state of being. And I also think that when people talk about divorce and whether or not you should get a divorce, and like the effects of divorce on kids, they're contrasting a happy, healthy marriage versus a divorce, as opposed to an unhappy marriage versus a divorce, even if it's an unhappy marriage. It's usually unhappy, the divorce, for at least one person. I don't know about all of you, but pretty typically there's one person who really doesn't want it and one person who really, really does. That, to me, is not a healthy marriage.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the things I run into counseling, just in general, a lot of times, is we get trapped when we try to take a non-ideal situation and turn it into the ideal situation instead of saying, here's a situation that's already not ideal, let me try to deal with it as best as possible.
And I think you also have to help manage the expectations of the couple as well. And to Arianna's point, I think you're spot on. There's a lot of times when people are coming in at different levels of acceptance or at different levels also of advantage and disadvantage. And we can talk about the income disparity that happens usually amongst the sexes. But I think also being able to explain how to move through the process, and that even if it starts out bad, it can get better. And I know a lot of folks have come in, and that just becomes how they define their lives. Oh, I had this bad divorce, and I can't get away from it. And just because it starts that way, it's always going to be that way. And I think we can help people move from that position.
So one thing that we're kind of saying, I know we haven't said this directly yet, is that it might be a misconception that the divorce is the end of a relationship only. In fact, what I find, especially if there's children involved, divorce is a relationship. And that's something, a divorced relationship is a relationship just as much as a married relationship is. It just has a lot of different expectations. I think I said it just has, never mind, I messed that up. It just has different expectations, not it just have different expectations. I have different expectations for my grammar.
Well, yeah, if you're in a co-parenting relationship, which that word co-parenting has always struck me kind of funny, because I think we talk about a co-parenting relationship with divorce, but we never talk about a co-parenting relationship within the marriage. And if you've got a healthy co-parenting relationship within the marriage, probably some of the divorces wouldn't happen that have happened. So this always struck me as funny that the co-parenting, that concept, doesn't tend to come up, at least without counseling.
That's really interesting.
Without counseling assistance.
Unless
you talk about divorce.
Yeah,
you don't talk about a co-parenting relationship within a marriage. And that is really what you should be having.
Yeah.
I love it. I think a lot about what I see when I'm doing a divorce mediation and what other couples who are married and struggling could learn from what comes out in a divorce process. And exactly what you're saying, I think about the things that people are happy about when they're divorced. Like it's kind of a relief. Nobody wants to say it, but it can really be a relief to not have your kids every other weekend. As much as you love them.
I've actually heard people say that, yeah. No.
It's like
I'm really, I feel guilty, but I really am glad I had this weekend to myself, where I don't have my kids this weekend. Yeah.
And I mentioned that I've seen a movie to friends and who are still married, and they're like, "What? You saw a movie?"
When did you do that?
And I think,
where did you torrent download that?
What?
When you're married, you have to torrent download those things. Yeah.
Right. But I'm just saying, like, I think that if people listen to the things that divorced individuals are happy about, well, how could you make those same things happen within your marriage for each other?
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good point, because we have a lot of shame with sometimes even discussing meeting our own needs inside of a relationship. And so then sometimes that even sets us up for, if this, and I think that actually sort of touches on something that I see a lot, which is if I'm the one who wants the divorce and I am thinking that, boy, once I get this divorce, all my dreams will come true automatically. That's negating a lot of really hard work and negating the pain of it as well, because I don't know about you guys, and I'll throw this out there, but everyone that I've worked with at some point, even if it was the most healthy, and not necessarily happy, but most healthy divorce, they got out of an abusive relationship or something that was just absolutely terrifying. They still wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, figuratively or literally in the middle of the night, saying, "Oh, was that the right thing to do? Was it? Did I do that right?"
I don't hear that from anybody. I
Yeah,
don't.
tell
I mean,
me.
I really don't. Everybody, to my experience, it's why didn't we do it sooner?
Yeah. Well, see, but I see that as co-occurring. I see that even in the same people sometimes, where they'll go through that. The times now, like the clients I work with a lot of people who come out of violent relationships, and they still have those doubts. That's one of the reasons I always stress that you don't want to do it for anyone else, just because your family told you, or just because you do it for your own reasons. And I think in the best case scenario, those are, people, they may wake up and think that, and then they think, well, of course it was, and they go back to sleep. But I run into that a lot, though. That's interesting. See, I hear that a lot from people, where they're like,
Maybe in LA, we're just. I don't know.
Well, and I think it depends too on the amount of healing that's taken place and how far out of that, are the couple or just one of the couple or one of the members of the couple. I mean, how far down the healing road have people walked? And I think as the years pass and you learn and you grow and you heal from what the emotional impact of a divorce, you tend to view it very differently. Whereas early on, because there's still such emotional upheaval, you could ask yourself, wow, did I do the right thing? But further along, as you're down the road, you may say, oh God, why did I even ask myself that question?
Why did it take so long?
Yeah. And why did I wait so long?
Well, I think the only time that I really see that where people second guess themselves is when they're listening to everybody else's advice. That's one of the first things I tell my clients when they are going through a divorce or their spouse has had an affair on them or something of that nature. I say, everyone around you is going to have an opinion. And a lot of people are going to give you advice that they may not follow themselves if they were in your situation. And so you really need to figure out what you want on this, because if you follow your own heart, chances are you are not going to have those regrets afterwards.
Yeah, or at least they're minimized.
And I think there's also, the element of, a particular person's cultural origin, religious background, and messages that they may get from those quarters that also filter in there, as well as their own expectations, maybe family values and the like, that may not necessarily match with their current situations, but which play upon their thinking, their judgment, or play into some of those feelings of shame or guilt or regret.
So to look at it as an evolving relationship, and also to try to, and I'm like you, Mike, I think it's great to listen to people in your life who are in your support system, but not to do what you do because of their advice, that you need to do it for your own reasons. I mean, we all listen to advice, but to not let other people make that decision for you. And then kind of what you're talking about, you're going right, Paul, right into something I really want to talk about, which is, how about the stigma? We do see a stigma and a shame that still exists in our culture. And let's talk a little bit about that. How do you see that play out in people's lives? How does it affect their divorces, or what damage does it do? Ready, go. No.
As far as the stigma of having been divorced or getting a divorce type of thing?
Sure.
Well, I have a couple clients interesting right now that are widowers. And they have both made the comment saying, "I'm looking for another widower because I do not want a divorcee." And so,
Wow.
I think that there is that
That's a very
stigma that
specific
if
criteria.
you get divorced, there's something wrong with you, which is not necessarily the case. It may be that you're just incompatible with the other person, or it could be that the other person was an abusive partner or something along those lines. I mean, if you marry someone who's borderline, probably not your fault if you're getting a divorce.
Well, but I think we have to use the F word here, don't we?
Go for it.
And go for it. Shoot.
Failure.
Yes.
And I think that we see divorce, and our culture sees divorce as failure, and we're not a failure culture. So, you know, if your marriage failed, then you're a failure, and it's somehow your fault. And I think that if we continue to see that as, you know, as the defining factor of a divorce, then you're going to have that stigma. You're going to have that sense of guilt. And I think that, you know, if we can move away from talking about, you know, divorce as a failed relationship, or as somehow a failure on a person's part, you know, then I think we can begin to move away from that.
Well, we use that phrase, don't we? We say a failed marriage. I mean, that is something that people still say. And I think we're over afraid of the word failure anyway in our culture, and that's a big thing in my therapy. I talk to people about all the time. But, you know, I also think that that's too simplistic, isn't it? I mean, to say a failed marriage oftentimes is kind of all-encompassing, and it's an either-or statement over something that is most likely a very complex situation.
I mean, what would a softer term be? An incompatible marriage?
I like to look at it as an ended marriage.
An ended marriage.
I mean, I look at like all marriages end. I mean, I always say, you know, the best case scenario for a marriage is you get to watch the person you love the most in the world die, or they get to watch you die. I mean, that's usually, we don't say it that way. I got that off of a Hallmark card, but it wasn't a very popular one. But they all end. You know, they end in one way or another eventually. And so to say that the marriage ended, it ended under terms maybe that you didn't like, and to kind of really process it more specifically. I'm a big
other
fan of
types of
specificity.
and other types of relationships end.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have a relationship anymore with my third grade teacher. You know, I remember her, but I don't have a relationship with her anymore, and so that relationship has ended. And so I think that produces some normalcy for people who've gone through a divorce. You know, I have some couples coming in saying, well, we're here because we want you to fix us. You know, and the first thing I do is kind of deal with that concept of the fact that, well, you're not really broken and neither is the relationship, but let's move to perhaps a healthier perspective of what you would like to see happen. But I think it's that same concept that Paul discussed, that being broken and having to be fixed, and it's a failure if it doesn't move forward into perpetuity type of thing.
Yeah. And surprise, Dori, we have your third grade teacher on the line here
Okay,
with
yeah.
us. No. Arianna, you were going to say something.
I was going to say, I think, Dwight, you're really nailing it on the head right there, because when you get married, what do you say? You say till death do us part, right? And so I think that that's really the natural outcome that people expect to have happen. Someone will die. You know, as awful as that sounds, that'll be what happens. And that's why I've been having this conversation. That's why women tend to really say, you know, why isn't he just dead now instead of me having to go through this and be in this awful situation? Because that's really what is supposed to happen when you get married. But I think to look at it more as, you know, it's just it's a transition, it's a transformation, it's an unexpected circumstance from what you thought was going to happen in your life, but how much happens that way, you know?
And pursuant to a lot of the things that we do in psychotherapy, which is trying to accept the reality on reality's terms as it is, rather than trying to change reality to something else.
Well, and if you think about it, you know, in unmarried relationships, when unmarried, couple relationships end, what do we say? Oh, broke up, it didn't work out, and you know, and while in certain circumstances that may be traumatic and difficult and painful and lead to, you know, growth in the leg, there's not that level of stigma to it. At least that's not my perception. Right. But yet, you know, again, with you know, marriage, there is that stigma because it's a failure. And I think that, you know, keeping it, you know, encased in that kind of problematic language is going to keep bringing up that stigma.
Well, marriage is just such a complex union, though, because you've got the potentially religious aspect of it, you've got the legal aspect of it, and then there's the romantic aspect of it. And that, to me, is why when I'm seeing a divorce case, the main thing people feel is confusion and fear because they walk in and they're just trying to essentially break up with each other. It really should just be the end of a bad boyfriend-girlfriend relationship that happens to have all these legal ramifications.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's anger too that really adds to the complexity of it as well, I think, in both people learning how to deal with that. And one thing that we haven't mentioned, but that kind of has come up a little subtly, or maybe not so much, is our view too that when there's a death, there's a finality to that, and you grieve, and there's a loss, and you mourn, and you reach a point where you move on. And with divorce, while you can heal and move on, that other person isn't dead, and they are going to be involved in your life and you involved in their life until one of you does die.
I always like to say, the people who die, they have the courtesy to just remain dead. Whereas if it's a more complicated end to a relationship, they don't. And dead people don't, there's not the feeling of, oh, maybe next week they won't be so dead. And then the week after, they'll be dead, but they won't be dead in such a sort of like dickish way or whatever.
Right. Well, what other relationship do we have? And I'm thinking fast here, and I can't think of one. Maybe one of you can. But what other relationship do we have that exists within our culture where when that relationship is ended or terminated, you still have to have some kind of a relationship with that other person? Mm-hmm. If it's a non-marital relationship and when you just broke up, maybe you see that person at work or maybe you don't, but as the years pass, the probability that you continue interacting with them is very small.
And look, when you do have a coworker that you break up with, what does everybody say? Oh my gosh, I can't, how do you do that? Get another job or whatever kind of thing. You see people who make career changes over that.
Sure.
So yeah, that is another level of complexity. It's not necessarily better or worse than when someone dies, but it is more complicated.
Well, no, I think the main thing is when you get divorced, it's not just a physical separation. There's also a violation of intimacy, basically. That you have told this person the deepest, darkest parts of yourself, the most intimate parts of yourself, and now they have that knowledge, and sometimes they do use that against you when you do have that breakup. When someone dies, they take it to the grave, literally. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the only other relationship I can think that's even somewhat close is with a parent or a very close sibling or something like that you've been able to share information with, but still, it's not the same. But when people become estranged from their parents or something like that, that's probably the only time I've seen that much passion involved in a breakup of a relationship.
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about that phrase, nobody can drive you crazy if you don't give them the keys. But what happens when the keys are your kids?
Yeah, exactly.
And
you can't take the keys away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm glad, I put this out there on the old Facebook and Twitter verse to some of our listeners to say, what questions would you ask this esteemed panel? Then it made us more esteemed just by saying that. That was the thing that they brought up is what kind of tips would you have for working with kids, with kids in your divorce situation, that you would tell people how to keep that healthy? What are your guys' thoughts about that?
One of the things I find works very well for couples is I talk with them at the very beginning about how they're going to tell the kids together, and we'll go over their sort of script for how they're going to talk to the kids. And then also when we're working on the parenting plan, which we do first, one of the best ideas is to put a calendar and one of those cork boards and whiteboards up in the kitchen in both of the houses and have both what their custody schedule is and also a few common household rules. And that one of the household rules is always whoever's house you're in gets the final say. So you don't get to call or text mom or dad to ask for permission because the one you're with won't give you
Try to
what
head
you
that
want.
kind of stuff off at the pass. Mm-hmm.
And show that you're a team.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that team is very important. I usually recommend to the parents a consistency that try to have the same bedtimes, meal times, especially with the younger children that you possibly can. I know that's not completely possible with two different households, but any type you can show consistency and what rules are and bedtimes and so forth, it goes a lot more smoothly. But also, I recommend to parents that take a look at your what you want for custody and make sure that the custody that you're asking for is not for your benefit, not the child's benefit. Because I think a lot of times parents will ask for split physical custody and stuff like that, not necessarily because that's what the child needs, it's because that's what they feel like they're entitled to.
I see that as well. People look at, I want to get a straight 50-50. And sometimes that works very well if you can peacefully live across the street from each other, I guess, or whatever. And not to get super specific or prescriptive, but I'm with you. I think if our primary goal is I want to get my time in, then we may not be accepting reality on reality's terms. If my primary goal is what's best for the kids, then that's a better reason to say that. I say that because I work with teens and specifically teenage girls when they hit that age where it's like every other day my parents shuffle me back and forth and I've got this, not to make it about that, but this type of hair product here and this type, and it's hard being a teenage girl in high school. And not that it isn't for teenage boys, but sometimes that flies under the radar because they'll sleep anywhere they'll sleep on a couch.
Well, and I think even for the younger children, and panel, feel free to disagree with me, but displacing a child every other week or halfway through the week, I don't know that's really that healthy for the child.
Yeah,
I think it just depends on how, to be honest, how it's presented. And I think fewer transitions per week are better. Transitions at school instead of at each other's house tend to be better because it's the more you're going to be dropped off at school anyway.
Definitely.
You're going to be picked up at school anyway. And they don't have to see their parents fighting or having an argument or talking about something they shouldn't hear. And with teenagers, I think the really important thing is that the parents are just at least keeping track of because a lot of parents, when they come in and they're divorcing while their kid's a teenager, they'll say, well, they have a card, they'll decide where they're going to be. Well, why don't you make sure you check in every night where that kid's going to be sleeping? Because otherwise she's telling you she's with dad and you she's with mom.
Yes,
and she's
definitely.
somewhere else.
She's with Johnny, down the street.
And Johnny's taking really good care of her, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that communication. Now, what about in situations where only one of you is trying to be as happy and healthy as possible? I know we don't ever see that with our population. No, what about then when someone is actively trying to undermine, or they are using those keys against you, as you put it in that wonderful kind of analogy? I've found that that's actually one of the main ways that abusive, jerky exes continue to be abusive and jerky, because what are you going to do? You got the kids. I have to wait here at home, and I know you're waiting at home because I'm 2 hours late. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to take me to court over 2 hours late? You're going to look crazy. And they continue to gaslight and continue to abuse through those little, just really, really manipulative things with custody.
That's probably the toughest one, because there's not a whole lot you can do other than coach the parent to talk to the kids, have that open relationship with the kids, and let them know without battering the other or going after the other parent in the same breath, letting them know that you love them, you always love them.
It's a fine line when you're talking to the kid, isn't it? Because
it is.
Dad's lying and doing this is very obvious, and I don't want to necessarily sit there and have a let's hate dad club. On the other hand, I want to be honest with my kid.
So I'm going to be really probably a little bit controversial and say that I think that you should be honest with your kids. And honest in an age-appropriate way, and it changes as they get older. And never to be bad-mouthing for the sake of bad-mouthing. But what I started with my kids was talking about perspectives. And I'd say, okay, if you have a play date with your best friend and I asked both of you, what was your favorite part of the play date? You'd probably both have a completely different idea of what the best part of the day was or the worst part was. But neither one of you are necessarily wrong, right? So that's perspective. And then sometimes some people don't see truth the way that we do. And, in any situation like what you're talking about, Dwight, I would say you can say, your dad and I don't see the truth the same way. So I can just tell you my truth. And I'll tell you, the kids, they know when they're being lied to and they're giving us, I think that your mom is so fabulous. Yeah. But they know that you guys are fighting like cats and dogs and that things are really, really tough. And then they feel like they can't trust you because you're full of it.
It's having a real conversation with the child. It's actually talking to them in an ongoing way. That it's like, this isn't just one quick conversation where I can say, well, you're like very dismissive. Because in that way, saying, "Oh, well, your mom's great, and I would never say anything against her," can be, in some ways, almost as harmful as saying, "Well, your mom's this crazy bitch," or what. Not exactly, but either way they know, oh, you're just saying what you want to say, you're lying to me, or you're just freaking out and having a tantrum. Well, you're not really communicating in either case, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and especially with teenagers who kind of have an over-exaggerated sense of justice anyway, in their lives. And so, they can really pick up when you are not being genuine. Mm-hmm. They have a radar that just goes off with that. And so I think to say anything like, certainly we know one parent shouldn't, a divorce situation is polarizing. Mm-hmm. And so you've got sides anyway. Whether you want to make sides are created. Yep. And to say anything or do anything that produces or accentuates that polarization, I think there's just nothing beneficial about it any way you look at it. And I think some parents can overcompensate by being condescending in that way and saying, oh, your mom is great. Well, the kid knows that mom isn't great all the mm-hmm. time. Well, mm-hmm. neither is dad. And so they're probably the best meter mm-hmm. of the faults of both of the parents because they see it really amazingly accurately sometimes.
And, I worked with a situation years ago where there was a case where the kids had never witnessed the physical abuse that was going on in the relationship. And I think you see that quite a bit, where that's behind closed doors and it's very well managed by the abuser, I guess, and had been sort of covered up and enabled by the victim in that case before she broke out of that, saying like, well, at least I can try to protect the kids, until she realized the only way to really protect them was to get out of the situation. And I was involved after that, and I was working with the relationships of the, I'll call the survivor of the situation, the healthy parent, and the kids. And some of the older kids were very angry with their mom because they didn't understand the full impact of why she left. And they really wanted to know, they really thought they wanted to know. And she was working very hard at saying, I'm just going to tell them that I don't feel, because she had to explain why I can't be in the same room with dad anymore, because I don't feel safe with dad anymore. And she kind of explained it as, she got a lot of pushback from these older, particularly an older boy, and she kind of explained it as, well, dad's a bully, like a bully for me. And that's very hard for us to communicate. And she had to work really hard because her oldest son would want to fight every time that she'd say something like that. Oh, no, I never saw it. And here's how dad is, and here's how dad's nice, and here's how this. And then one day, finally, her son kind of comes to her one night and says, hey, here's some observations that I've made about dad. And she didn't go, yeah, let's jump on it, like maybe she kind of felt like, but she also didn't lie either. She just sat back and listened. And he said, I think I see now why dad is a bully. And at that point, she kind of said, I'm glad that you do, and it was a little worse than you know, without getting into a lot of details. But he was ready to hear that and understand it because they had this ongoing conversation. But she had to be the very mature one mm-hmm. to not try to meet her needs through the relationship with her son because he wasn't ready yet. Well, it was very difficult.
My hat's off to her, too, because to listen to that and not jump on the bandwagon and say, yes, you see it, awesome, kind of thing. And,
exactly.
and
he is a bastard. Let's throw these darts at his picture.
Yeah, that's
one,
right.
One more soldier on my side, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that's the kind of honesty that Arianna is referring to, mm-hmm. And I don't think that's controversial at all. I wholeheartedly agree. But having been in the situation, not an abusive situation like that, but in a situation where the kids finally see and understand, it takes about all of the control you can muster to not say, hallelujah, glory be, you finally got it and you understand, what's going on. And that didn't come for years. And so it does take a lot of control to not self-gratify, I guess, in that way.
And so that's where I think one of the important tips when you're in a situation where you have a super unhealthy ex or soon-to-be ex or whatever you want to call it, is, you don't want to meet your needs through relating to your kids and dumping on them, but you do want to meet your needs. And you do want to have someone in your life who you can just vent to. Maybe multiple people if you're lucky enough, but you want to have that sibling, cousin, friend who you can call up and say, hey, adult to adult, let's go out to dinner tonight because it's been one crazy weekend dealing with this whole mess. And I just need you to sit there and accept all of this stuff that I'm going to just throw at you because I can't say it around my kids.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because choosing that person and also the timing is very, very important because you have to find the person who is not going to let it trickle back to your kids, because I've seen situations where they've used their own parents to vent and so forth, but when the parents go to the grandparents, they say, hey, by the way, did you know your dad's an SOB? And it gets back to them that way. And then the other thing I also recommend to the parents, when you find that person, even though you're extremely frustrated with the other parent at that point, do not ever vent while you have the children in your custody, unless you leave the premises, take a drive, and so forth, because the kids somehow still hear that.
They will hear you.
Or
right.
they sense some tension going on, or whatever it may be, because there's been a lot of times when I've worked with the teenagers like you, Dwight, and they say, well, I know my mom hates my dad. I heard her. She goes in her closet and she whispers on the phone, but we can still hear her.
Mm-hmm. Or we hear through the heating vent.
Yeah, we hear.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. So, if you have to do it while you have your kids, take a drive, go somewhere where there's no chance the kids are going to hear you calling the father names or the mother names, because it does create a rift. I always have the opinion that the kids are going to figure out eventually who's who in this relationship by themselves.
And if a parent, and barring some really extreme abusive situation where you're worried for your kid's safety, I want to say that, just qualifier. There are situations, like you're saying, where the truth will usually manifest itself. If someone is going to let them down, they're going to notice that and pick up on it over time. And just being healthy yourself is probably the best bet there for your relationship. And on the other hand, there are times where I've seen a situation where neither parent could be really healthy towards each other, but both of them could be healthy towards their kids. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to get caught up in a resentment war to say, you have this great relationship with your dad, he's really nice to you, but you don't know what he did to me or what your mom did to me. Mm-hmm. You don't want to get into that, because, hey, if they're able to be healthy around the kid, even if some of it is just fraudulent and it's just the way they act just around the kid and it doesn't hurt the kid, that's kind of a win for your kid.
For the kid.
Well, to me, the number one factor is safety, and that's physical safety. It's also emotional safety.
Right. Correct.
I think it's tempting to go to that place of one day they'll see, but also, well, gosh, how's that going to feel for that child when they see that about their parent? This is still their mom or their dad who has presumably mental health issues or whatever is going on that has caused them to be this way, right? So part of the way that you're speaking with them as they're younger and getting older, in my mind, is helping them process those little bits of information as they seem to start to recognize, I noticed this, what's going on with mom or dad, and trying to help them process it in a way that's not necessarily going to make you the good guy in the end, but help them be comfortable with their parents.
And that openness, then that's where there's a payoff for having been open. And even I guess neutral is one way to say it. We want to be honest, but yet if we fly off the handle every time you say, hey, Dad did this, yeah, let me tell you more. Mom did this, well, let me tell you more. Then, they're not going to bring it to us. They'll go to a friend or someone else, or you got to pay one of us to talk to them, which is still good. That's actually, as long as we're kind of throwing out tips, that's one thing I think is really useful is don't be afraid to get therapy in the situation. Not everything is pathological, but, divorce for anyone is a major adjustment.
I think people ask me all the time, well, should we take our kids to see a therapist? And I think why not? I think there's not a child whose parents are divorcing who wouldn't benefit. And I think that there's probably not a human being on earth who wouldn't benefit from walking into a therapist's office every once in a while and just checking in, and I'm not a therapist, so I'm telling you guys, not me. I really think that that's an important part of what we need as humans. I really do. And just to go to the age appropriate way of telling, I think of it a lot in a similar way to how you might tell your kid about sex. People talk about, well, answer the questions they're asking, answer them honestly, but answer at where they are.
I thought you say hire a therapist to do it for you.
Or hire somebody, or find a teacher, or find somebody who you trust.
No, exactly.
People
Yeah.
go to their doctors and say, have the doctor explain it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
No, I'm totally with you. I think it is just one of those big facts of life that you have to have. That's where it goes to being open and having this discussion and not being afraid to talk about things.
And not answering more than you're really being asked at the time necessarily.
Definitely.
That's a great point.
And I guess just one, I know we're running out of time here, but just one other tip I want to throw out to parents or people that may be listening is I think human nature, we have a tendency to demonize and canonize people, that we either put them on a pedestal as a saint or we say they're the most horrible person that lives. That, give your ex the benefit of the doubt. And this is my old CPS coming out of me, even though I haven't worked in that with CPS for years and years on that. But if your child comes home with a bruise or something, don't be afraid to ask the other parent, how did this happen? Don't involve the state unless you know that it probably or most likely is abuse.
The only counterpoint-ish that I would put there is the qualifier that history, of course, plays a role in that.
Yeah, definitely. History definitely plays a role in that. But, I remember when I was online worker for them that we would get these cases where a child would have, for example, a urinary tract infection, and the other parent would immediately accuse the other parent of sexual abuse or something like that. And I worry sometimes that the process of the examination and questioning and so forth does more damage than taking the child to the doctor in the first place, saying, is there something going on here? Or is there, did Tommy get hit by... Did Tommy run into a table or something like that? Finding out some things, talk to your child first. But there's so many times that because we assume that the person was so bad to us and we don't like the person so bad that we assume that something bad really has happened. And sometimes it does. I want to qualify that sometimes there are people out there that are abusers. Sometimes there are people out there who deserve to be investigated and have their child's rights taken away. But I find that they're less common than people think.
Well, it kind of goes back, once again, that analogy of the keys, to your life or whatever, is you want to err on the side of communication, I guess, is what you're saying, as well as make sure that you're making the decision for the child's best interest, not using the child as a way to attack the other person.
Sure, and that doesn't happen as common as people think.
Right.
And maybe is Arianna or Arianna? Arianna. Maybe you've seen some cases in your line of work too, but it seems like that most of the time people do not want to use the other person as leverage. They don't want to accuse someone else of child abuse on purpose. But every once in a while you do find cases where the person is purposely accusing just to give the other person a metaphoric black eye.
And I think those people are more likely to be abusers. Anyway, you were talking to Arianna, not me.
Yeah, but you probably see that a lot more than I do at this point in my career of when people are doing that and not doing that. And
I happen to see it a fair amount, but I also tend to see a lot of high conflict cases.
Gotcha.
And I think that's going to be the cases that are in court. I don't think that it's going to be your average everyday divorce where that happens. I don't. But that's probably one of the problems for couples where that really is an issue, and for the person who has been abused and is being falsely accused of something, because the default is, well, everybody wants what's best for their kids. Well, no, actually, there are plenty of people who want what's best for themselves, and I really do think that they convince themselves that what's best for them is best for the kids.
Well, that's kind of the key to narcissism, if we're talking about narcissism.
Right.
Or they don't even think about what's best for the kids.
Yeah, morality is defined by what's right for me.
This goes to when you're finding your friend to talk to, about your divorce. If somebody doesn't get that about narcissism or any other type of a personality disorder, that can be a really frustrating exercise talking to somebody like that.
Absolutely.
Paul, what were you going to say?
I think just going back to the issue of abuse and helping the parent who's just not sure. I always use the rule of thumb of trust your gut, but don't give in to your fear and anxiety. So trying to kind of calm the anxiety down, and then what does your gut really say? Is that bruise really suspicious, or is it kind of your anxiety running away with you? And what I've found is that in the majority of cases, when parents really do kind of get the anxiety level down, their gut read is usually pretty good, usually pretty accurate. And then the decision becomes clear. You either make the call, do the investigation, or you don't. I like what you were saying, Dwight, though, about communication, asking the question, but then also tempering it with history as well. The other thing I want to jump in back to some of the parenting stuff is I think it's also important when you're dealing with the parents. That oftentimes we see behaviors in our kids that remind us of our spouses or our exes.
That's very
big. It's important to remind parents that your child is not your ex. So just because you're seeing something that looks like your ex doesn't make them your ex.
Just because they lie, or maybe even, and I actually find that physical resemblance sometimes plays a role here.
Absolutely. It triggers those old kind of responses or brings up those old feelings. Mm-hmm. Paradoxically, though, at the same time, your child is part your ex, a part you and part your ex. So when you're saying bad things about your ex, they're taking that in and may think that you're saying bad things about them as well.
Or sometimes even directly, like, you're so much like your mom, you're so much like your dad.
And wait, you don't like mom, you don't like dad, therefore you don't like me. And I think that it's important to help parents understand the weight of their words on their children. And often they'll go, no, they know I don't mean it. How many times have we been on the receiving end of things that people didn't mean, but it still affected us? Yeah. So trying to have that conversation with them, I think, is important.
And just to add to that, because I think that's an excellent point, and that does happen all the time, that parents can remind themselves that they're human and that they will be triggered, and especially while the divorce process is happening, there will probably be moments where they do something like that and they didn't mean to, and that it's okay to apologize to your kids just like you do anybody else, and go back and say, you know what? That wasn't the right thing for me to say, and this is what I could have said, and this is how I felt, and I said it because I was feeling this.
Yeah, and I think that's a good rule of thumb in general parenting.
Yeah.
Not being afraid to apologize to your children.
Yeah, and I think that when we look at relationships as being, more fixed rather than fluid, we make a lot of these kind of errors. When we look at it and say, this is an ongoing thing, a relationship with my kids, relationship with my ex, relationship with the world, the universe, is that we need to tend to that relationship sometimes, and that includes calling ourselves on it. And really, I think there's a lot to be said for having insight into saying, yeah, I'm human and I did the wrong thing, so let me repair it, instead of building justification and saying, it was okay for me to say that because let me think of something.
Well, I think that's another thing, especially with teenagers, because I work a lot with adolescents as well, that they're going to be the first to pick up on is they will understand a genuine apology, but they'll also understand rationalization. Mm-hmm. And you will not score points with rationalization, but you will be able to open up lines of communication with a sincere, genuine apology.
Everyone loves to be lectured to about why they're wrong to be offended, right?
Yeah.
Especially teenagers. Well,
that's a winning strategy right there.
Okay, so this is the point where I'm going to ask everybody if there's anything else you'd like to say before we call it a day. I hate when people have their favorite, at this point I really want to say it. And it's the title of my book.
I'll just say one more thing, that I spend more time in marriage counseling teaching people how to disagree than I do how to agree. Mm-hmm. And I really think that's a talent that all of us can have, is learning how to disagree with people, that most disagreements or opinions are not facts, and it's okay.
That's a good point.
That's good. Mm-hmm. That's an ender right there. Way to go, Mike. So Goofy got a divorce, I guess. Goofy from Disney. That's who I'm talking about. Not just some old buddy of mine who we nicknamed Goofy. No, actually Goofy from Disney. There was a TV show a while back. For those of you that remember, little animated sitcoms that they put together with Disney, like DuckTales or Chippendales Rescue Rangers. Come on now. I know you're out there. Goofy had a show called Goof Troop, I believe, where he had a son. He's a single dad with his son Max, and you just kind of assume that whoever Goofy had a child with must be dead, probably because of something he did accidentally. Sorry, but and also because mothers are always dead in those situations in Disney movies, I believe. Anyway, but this was never on the show. It was never addressed, but I think on some article that I remember my mother quoting, or that I saw when I was younger and that was on TV, it said something about that Goofy as a divorced father. Now, it was never addressed on the show, and I don't know why, but I can only imagine that might touch on some of the stigma of divorce that we talked about. Divorce is something that happens and it affects people. And why wouldn't it affect Goofy? I mean, he'd be hard to be married to, right? He'd probably drop a lot of things. He's always involved in various sports. There's that creepy sort of thing that he's in a universe of anthropomorphic animals, but he's apparently a dog, but he doesn't do much to try to save Pluto. And then there's that, that's that terrible noise that he makes whenever he falls over, which he probably also makes during sex. But anyway, so the fact that we can't talk about it on a show that meant for children, or that we have to just not say anything about it in a lot of situations, we touched on this during the discussion, but one of the things that does some harm. I've actually seen situations where people get out of an abusive relationship or get out of some other really unhealthy situation, and sometimes they get into another unhealthy situation. It's not any secret why predators tend to look for people to prey upon, and there are certain risk factors there sometimes if you are getting out of a violent relationship, a relationship with a predator, that another predator might find you. And what predators do for their lives is they fool people. So if you get another narcissistic or controlling, harmful person in your life, I've actually seen cases where people stay in their second marriage knowing that it's unhealthy and knowing the cost of it, because they're afraid what people will think about having a second divorce. Usually it's not as long as the first marriage, and you can sort of turn that around with trying to reduce the shame, obviously. But it's a bad thing. So we have a lot of stigma. We don't like to talk about it, but it's something that affects our lives. It affects the lives of those. If you've never been divorced, and even if you go your whole life and never get divorced, which is quite possible, you will know people, and people that you love will go through this, and it affects their lives. And so it's good to know a little bit about, how to be as healthy as possible during this process. So I hope that you enjoyed that. I thought it was awesome and lots of good insights. I made a few notes, and it's a kind of a trick there. You just crumple the paper by the microphone, and it makes it sound like you're just shuffling through things rather than me having held this in my nervous hands the whole time, waiting until I could mention it. But just a few of the things that we touched on as we talked about looking at a divorce situation as basically an ongoing relationship, that it's a change in the relationship status, and that if you can look at it that way, that can also help you try to think of how to make it as healthy as possible. Keeping communication open as much as possible, as much as really your partner or ex-partner will, and as healthy as they're willing to be, that's how healthy you want to try to be as healthy as you can be, but you want to be as healthy in that communication as they will be. Yeah, I think that made sense. Part of it that didn't really come up too when we were talking is that one of the things I often encourage people to do is to embrace the fights that you don't have to have anymore. This can actually be a very healthy part of a post-divorce relationship, is if there's that fight that you keep having about whatever it is, stop it. There's a good chance that you don't ever need to resolve that anymore, ever. And if there's something that's you're hanging on to or they're hanging on to that you keep falling back into debating and arguing and talking about, stop talking about it. You don't need to talk about it anymore. That is the benefit of not being in the relationship anymore. There's so many negatives in many divorce situations. Don't forget to embrace the positives. looking at a divorce as an ending relationship rather than a failed relationship. We talked about that as a way to redefining that so that you can look at it in a healthy way. Taking other people's advice with that really, really healthy grain or maybe even several grains of salt. Don't make decisions based off of what other people want you to do. Make sure that you're clarifying what you want to do. Obviously, kind of an old school advice that not surprisingly we all believe in is don't use your kids as weapons against the other person, but do be honest with them when they come to you and when they're realizing things that are going on. It's not your job to protect the ex from their own behavior, but it's also not your job to demonize them. So there's some little things that you can take from this discussion. I thought it was a model of good health and communication as we talk to each other about this stuff. Hey, if you want to know more about the people that were here, you can find Dori Pye, that's Pye, is a member of the Aspire Network. They have a website, aspireut.com. I'm on that website too, because I rent an office from that group. But Dori works with adults, adolescents, couples. She does a lot of work with body image and eating disorder issues. She actually practices and works in Layton, Utah, also in Logan. You can also find her on Psychology Today and the Find a Therapist. You can find most of us on there too, because that's a good place to be if you're a therapist. So she does a lot of cool things. One of the things that she plugged after we were done recording, it didn't come up in the conversation, but there is a booklet called Healing Hearts that you can find. It's written by Elizabeth Hickey and Elizabeth Dalton. It's written by a social worker and a lawyer, basically. And they put a lot of things in there that are some exercises and things for kids and for families that are going through divorce. So very helpful things in there. Dr. Peluso has a website, drpaulpeluso.com. And you can look that up. He's written some books, mostly for therapists that are in the field working in this. He does trainings also on infidelity. He told us those that can't do, teach. So I don't know if we captured that in the discussion, and I wanted to share it with you. I thought that was cool and clever. So he talks a lot about infidelity, recovering from infidelity specifically, and healthy relationships and things like that. You should check out that stuff. Of course, Arianna, I've talked about her before, but let me mention again, she has a website called ajmediation.com, and she also writes frequently for the website yourtango.com in the relationship area. Really good. You should definitely go there and read everything that she's ever written. I'm saying that sounds jokingly, but you really should. It's good stuff. She has a really good point of view on things. Of course, you know where you can find Mike Fitch and myself. You can find us right here on The Broken Brain, week after week, slaving away for your enhanced psycho-knowledge and mental healthiness. We're going to be here again soon talking about some other things. Oh, and I got something, too. You go over to, you can hear this podcast, of course, on iTunes or Stitcher. I'm assuming you've cracked that code if you are listening to this. But you can also hear any of our old episodes on dwighthurst.com. If you go over there, there's a podcast section and also a podcast archive section. You can check out, there's some other fun stuff that I'm putting up on there. Starting some online groups, and just released an article that should be up by the time this airs. It's actually a booklet that you can order. It's a digital booklet about relaxation, sleep, and lucid dreaming, if you're so inclined as to be curious about that, and some of the psychological factoids and also benefits, and a little bit of how-to if you're interested in using your dreams as a relaxation aid. You can also still find part of my series on confronting fear, which is jumping into the sky. It's an article based off of research I did with informal research that I did interviewing skydivers about how they face their fears, and there's a couple others of those coming out soon. Hey, thanks for downloading and for being here, and I hope that we will definitely see y'all again without seeing you the next time that you tune in to The Broken Brain.